The hall was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional footsteps of staff moving quickly across the polished floor. The lights above flickered slightly, throwing shadows that danced along the walls. He moved carefully, picking up discarded programs, wiping smudges off the wooden floor, and stacking chairs that had been pushed aside. Every movement was precise, almost mechanical, yet there was a quiet dignity in the way he worked. Most people wouldn't notice him, but he was content to remain invisible, to be the one who ensured everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. He had always preferred the background, the steady, unseen work. It gave him peace, a sense of purpose without the pressure of attention. He knew the routines, the schedules, the way the lights dimmed before a performance, the sound of the first notes echoing through the hall. Today, though, there was a task he hadn't anticipated. A senior staff member approached, clipboard in hand, and spoke with a tone that left no room for argument. The stage needs to be cleaned before the next performance. I want it spotless. He nodded, taking the broom and dustpan, feeling the weight of responsibility but not the thrill of recognition. The stage had always intimidated him, looming large at the far end of the hall with its grand piano at the center. It was the same piano that carried the music of countless performers, the one whose polished surface reflected the bright lights and the eager eyes of audiences. Today, it would only reflect the hands of someone cleaning, someone ordinary. He moved toward it, carefully stepping over cables and stands, avoiding the spots that still held traces of the previous performance. As he began his work, a familiar feeling crept over him, a gentle pull toward the piano that he had not felt in years. His fingers itched, not for the dustpan or the broom, but for the smooth black and white keys. He shook his head slightly, chastising himself. Not now. Not today. There was work to be done. But the temptation was there, subtle, insistent. While wiping the floor around the piano, he found himself glancing at the instrument, noticing the way the light gleamed off the lacquered surface, how the keys seemed to beckon him, almost alive in the empty hall. He remembered the first time he had touched a piano. He had been a child, small hands hovering over keys, unsure of how to make the notes sound right. There had been frustration, yes, but also wonder. That first simple melody he had learned still lingered in his mind, a memory of triumph and joy. Over the years, he had practiced in secret, hiding his talent from the world, knowing that his role in life was different. He was the one who cleaned, the one who prepared, the one who ensured that others could shine. Now, standing there in the quiet hall, he felt a stir of emotion. He set down the broom and dustpan for just a moment, drawn closer to the piano. He ran his fingers lightly over the keys, the coolness sending a shiver up his spine. A single note sounded soft, hesitant, almost shy. He paused, listening to the resonance, the way it filled the empty space. It was a sound that reminded him of who he was, of what he had always been capable of, hidden though it might be. For a few minutes, he simply let his hands hover over the keys, as if testing the waters, unsure if he dared to play. Then, almost without realizing it, he pressed another key, then another, forming a simple sequence of notes that flowed naturally, effortlessly. The music was soft at first, delicate, almost like a whisper. He felt his heart beat faster, his body leaning slightly into the piano as if it were a friend welcoming him back after years of absence. Somewhere in the back of the hall, a janitor paused, hearing the faint melody. He frowned, unsure if it was part of the event or just someone's imagination. Another staff member peeked through the door, eyebrows raised, noticing the figure at the piano. Nobody said anything. They just watched quietly, sensing that this was something special, though they couldn't yet understand why. The music began to grow, subtle at first, then stronger, more confident. He moved from simple notes to short phrases, each one carrying a piece of his soul. Memories of late-night practice sessions, of moments when he had thought he would never be good enough, flooded back. And yet, here he was, playing not for applause, not for recognition, but because the music demanded it, because it had always been a part of him, waiting for the right moment. Time seemed to slow. The hall, usually so imposing, felt alive, vibrant with the energy of the music. He lost himself in the melody, the mundane task of cleaning forgotten. Dust and footprints no longer mattered. What mattered was the sound, the story he was telling with each key pressed. His fingers moved with confidence now, weaving together notes into patterns that felt natural and free. There was emotion, joy, sadness, longing, all present in the music, unspoken but understood by anyone who might hear. Outside, the first few members of the audience and staff began to gather, drawn by the unexpected music. They paused at the doorway, uncertain if they should enter, afraid to interrupt something so intimate. Their eyes widened as they listened, realizing that the hands moving over the keys belonged to someone who had been hiding a remarkable talent. Whispers spread, soft but growing, as people began to share what they were hearing. The hall, usually filled with structured performances and rehearsed acts, was witnessing something raw, something real, something unplanned. He didn't notice them at first. He was too absorbed in the flow of the music, too caught up in the feeling of the keys under his fingers. Each note was a small triumph, a statement of who he was, a defiance of the life he had led in the shadows. The piano seemed to respond to him, the sound richer, more alive, as if it had been waiting for this very moment. He could feel the room itself vibrating with the energy, the walls absorbing the sound and reflecting it back, amplifying the beauty of what he was creating. After a while, he began to play with more confidence, letting his emotions guide the music. There was a story in every note, a memory, a hope, a longing for recognition that he had kept buried for years. And yet, he played not for fame or glory, but because it was right, because the piano called to him and he could not refuse. It was as if the stage itself had transformed from a place of work and duty into a sanctuary, a place where his true self could emerge. The staff members who had gathered silently began to exchange glances, astonished. Some held their hands over their mouths, trying to contain their reactions. Nobody wanted to interrupt this unexpected miracle. The music was more than beautiful, it was alive. It carried emotion, skill, and passion that no one had ever imagined could come from someone whose name had never been on the marquee. For the first time, they saw him not as the quiet worker, the one who cleaned the stage, but as an artist, a person capable of moving hearts without a single word. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. He continued to play, unaware of time, lost in the rhythm and flow of the melody. Every key pressed was a connection, a bridge between his past and present, between his hidden talent and the world that had never seen it. The piano was no longer just an instrument, it was a voice, speaking for him in a way he had never been able to with words. Eventually, the music softened, the final notes lingering in the air like a gentle sigh. He lifted his hands, almost afraid to break the spell. Silence followed, but it was not empty. It was filled with awe, with a sense of having witnessed something extraordinary. Slowly, the gathered staff began to clap, softly at first, then more confidently. Their applause grew, filling the hall with warmth and admiration. He looked up, surprised, a flush creeping across his face. He had not played for them, had not expected any recognition, and yet here it was, overwhelming and sincere. A few people whispered, unable to contain their amazement. They spoke of the beauty, the emotion, the skill that had poured from his fingers. Some were already taking out their phones, wanting to capture a memory that they knew would stay with them forever. The man at the piano realized, in that moment, that his life had shifted, even if he didn't yet understand how. A simple act of cleaning the stage had led to this, a revelation of who he truly was, a moment that would change everything. He returned to the broom reluctantly, picking it up with a new sense of pride. Cleaning was no longer a chore. It was a prelude to something greater, a reminder of what he could do when given a chance. The stage, the piano, the empty hall. They were no longer symbols of routine and duty. They were invitations, openings to a world that had never noticed him, a world that was now beginning to see him for who he truly was. As he continued his work, he couldn't help but glance at the piano occasionally, his fingers itching to return to the keys. He knew this was only the beginning, that the world had just caught a glimpse of something special. The day that began with a simple task of cleaning had unexpectedly become a turning point. And though he would remain humble, he could feel a quiet thrill inside him, a sense that life had opened a door that had long been closed, and that something extraordinary was waiting just on the other side. The hall had grown quiet again after the soft applause had faded, but he could still feel the energy lingering in the air. The staff returned to their routines, whispering to one another, but he barely noticed them. His mind was still on the piano, on the way it had responded to him, on the way the hall had seemed to come alive. For a moment, he simply stood there, his hands hovering over the keys, afraid that if he moved, the magic would disappear. He took a deep breath and sat on the bench, his fingers trembling slightly. It was strange to feel nervous, yet exhilarated at the same time. The piano was no longer just an object. It was a companion, a voice that waited patiently for him to speak through it. He pressed a few keys, testing the sound, and a small smile crept across his face. The notes were softer this time, more intimate, but they still carried a certain warmth, a sense of connection he had not felt in years. As he began to play again, memories flooded back. He remembered sitting on a small bench in a tiny room as a child, struggling to play even the simplest songs. He remembered the frustration, the tears, the endless hours of practice when nobody watched or praised him. Yet he also remembered the joy, the small victories when his fingers finally moved correctly, when a song sounded beautiful for the first time. Those memories fueled his fingers now, guiding them across the keys, each note a step closer to freedom, to expression, to himself. The music began softly, a simple melody that seemed to float through the hall. He closed his eyes and let the sound take over, allowing himself to forget everything else. The broom he had been holding rested against the stage, forgotten. The world outside the hall ceased to exist. There was only him, the piano, and the notes he created. He played with a gentle touch, careful but expressive, letting each chord linger a moment longer before moving on. Outside the hall, a few people stopped as they passed by, drawn by the unexpected sound. Some were curious, others puzzled, but all were captivated. The melody was unlike anything they had expected from the quiet figure who cleaned the stage. Whispers spread quickly, and soon a small crowd had gathered at the edges of the room, watching silently, holding their breath as if afraid to break the spell. He didn't notice them at first. His focus was absolute, his mind entirely on the music. He allowed himself to explore, to experiment with the sound. He tried a faster rhythm, letting his fingers dance lightly over the keys, feeling the flow of energy from one note to the next. Then he slowed, letting the notes stretch and linger, filled with emotion and memory. The music told a story, though he had no conscious plan for it. It was a story of quiet perseverance, of hidden talent, of moments waiting to be discovered. The staff who had initially gathered now exchanged glances, astonished at what they were hearing. Some whispered about the skill, some about the emotion, and some simply shook their heads in disbelief. Nobody spoke too loudly, not wanting to disrupt the intimate connection between the man and the piano. The music was more than just beautiful. It was alive, telling a tale that words could not capture. Even those who had never paid much attention to him now saw him differently. He was no longer just a helper behind the scenes. He was an artist, someone capable of moving hearts without even speaking. He felt a thrill, a mixture of fear and excitement, as he realized that the notes were carrying beyond the empty hall. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sound, the air itself resonating. He dared to take more risks, to play passages he had only ever practiced in private. Each note carried intention, each chord expressed emotion. He felt as though he was speaking without words, communicating everything he had kept hidden for years. The crowd outside the hall grew silently, a few more staff and early audience members drawn by the music. They peeked in through the doorway, amazed to see him so immersed in his playing. Nobody wanted to interrupt, yet everyone was mesmerized. The quiet janitor who had paused earlier now stood completely still, his hands gripping a mop, unable to believe what he was witnessing. The sound was extraordinary, the skill unmistakable, and the emotion behind it undeniable. Everyone was holding their breath, silently acknowledging that this was not a common occurrence. Time seemed to blur. Minutes felt like hours and hours felt like seconds. He played through one piece after another, each flowing into the next without pause. The music was a conversation, a confession, a declaration of who he was. His fingers moved naturally, almost instinctively, guided by the memories of countless hours spent in secret practice. There was no thought of recognition, no desire for praise, only the joy of expression, the release of a lifetime of hidden talent. At one point, a particularly soft and slow passage caught the attention of a few people in the hall. They leaned closer, mesmerized by the emotion behind each note. They could feel the story, the struggle, the triumph, all expressed through the piano. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, feeling a connection they had never anticipated. Others exchanged glances, silently agreeing that they had never witnessed anything quite like this in their lives. He noticed the reactions only faintly. His attention was still fully on the keys, on the sound, on the way the piano seemed to breathe with him. The hall no longer felt empty. It was filled with energy, with the unspoken presence of those who had gathered. The music created a shared experience, a moment that linked everyone together, even if they remained silent. He felt a warmth in his chest, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing he was sharing something real, something that mattered. The melody began to build, growing stronger, more confident, more daring. He experimented with rhythm, dynamics, and intensity, allowing the music to reach its full potential. He was no longer just cleaning the stage. He was commanding it, making it his own. Every chord struck with purpose. Every note played with emotion. The small group of onlookers could hardly contain their amazement. Their initial curiosity had transformed into awe, and they remained silent, letting the moment unfold naturally. As the music flowed, he felt a connection to the history of the piano, to the countless performers who had touched it before him. He imagined their hands on the keys, their struggles, their triumphs, and their emotions. He felt a sense of continuity, of being part of something larger than himself. It was humbling yet empowering. He realized that this moment was not just about him. It was about the music, the hall, and the shared experience of everyone present. The quiet energy in the hall began to spread. Staff members who had initially returned to their duties now stopped, drawn back by the power of the music. They leaned against walls, peered through windows, and whispered to one another. Nobody interrupted, nobody clapped too loudly, but the air was thick with admiration and wonder. They could feel the talent, the emotion, and the passion that radiated from him as he played. Finally, he allowed the music to settle, ending on a soft, lingering note. The hall was filled with silence, but it was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. The few people still standing watched, unsure whether to move, unsure how to respond. Slowly, a soft murmur of appreciation began, followed by quiet clapping. The applause grew steadily, though still respectful, acknowledging the incredible performance they had just witnessed. He looked up, surprised and slightly embarrassed, realizing that the act of playing had not gone unnoticed. The music had drawn people in, creating a moment none of them would forget. He returned to the broom, picking it up slowly, his hands still tingling from the music. Cleaning the stage felt different now, almost ceremonial. The piano sat silently, its surface gleaming in the light, as if proud of what had just occurred. He knew that he had shared something personal, something precious, and that it had been received with appreciation. The quiet thrill he felt was a mixture of joy, relief, and anticipation, a recognition that this moment might change everything for him. As he continued his work, he allowed himself to glance at the piano occasionally, fingers twitching with the desire to return. He knew that the performance had been unplanned, spontaneous, yet it had revealed something vital, not just to the audience but to himself. He had been reminded of his passion, of his talent, and of the power of music to connect people in ways words never could. And though he returned to his duties, he carried with him a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet excitement that something extraordinary was beginning to unfold. The hall seemed to pulse with energy as he continued to play, each note more confident than the last. He no longer felt the need to be cautious or restrained. The music flowed naturally from him, a reflection of years of hidden practice and a lifetime of passion stored away in silence. He leaned into the keys, letting his fingers fly with both strength and delicacy, weaving melodies that were intricate yet deeply moving. He felt a strange exhilaration, a mixture of fear and joy. He knew that the notes he played were extraordinary, that anyone who heard them would be captivated. And yet, he did not think about recognition or praise. He simply played, letting the music guide him, allowing every emotion he had carried for years to pour out in sound. It was both freeing and terrifying, a moment where vulnerability and brilliance collided. Outside, the small crowd of staff and early audience members had grown quietly, drawn by the power of the performance. People who had passed by out of curiosity lingered, unable to leave. Their faces showed astonishment, their eyes wide with admiration. Some whispered to one another, trying to comprehend what they were hearing. Each note seemed to hold a story, a feeling, a truth that touched something deep inside. They could sense that this was no ordinary performance. He began to experiment, introducing variations in tempo and rhythm. His fingers danced across the keys, sometimes gently, sometimes striking with force, creating a dynamic contrast that made the music come alive. Each chord carried emotion, each phrase seemed to tell a story. He felt connected to something greater than himself, a flow of creativity and energy that he had never experienced in the quiet of his private practice. The empty hall was now alive with sound, and the few observers outside the room felt it as though they were sharing in something sacred. He paused for a moment, letting the final note of a particularly complex sequence linger. Silence followed, but it was thick with anticipation. Even those who had just begun to listen were captivated, holding their breath as they awaited the next movement. He smiled faintly to himself, aware that the music had the power to draw people in, to create a connection that words could never achieve. He pressed his hands back to the keys, and the melody resumed, flowing seamlessly from one passage to another. The room seemed to expand, the sound filling every corner, resonating against the walls, the ceiling, and even the floors. He felt a sense of responsibility, as if the piano had entrusted him to tell a story that needed to be heard. The music became more daring, more expressive, pushing the boundaries of his skill, yet never faltering. He played with confidence, a sense of liberation washing over him, as if the years of hidden practice had all led to this singular moment of expression. Outside, the audience began to stir. More staff members, performers, and even a few early ticket holders stopped to listen, quietly forming a crowd at the edges of the hall. They were careful not to interrupt, but their attention was complete. Eyes widened, mouths opened slightly in astonishment, and some clutched their phones, capturing a fleeting glimpse of the unexpected talent before them. Every note seemed to communicate not just skill but emotion, a direct line to the heart that left everyone feeling as though they were witnessing something miraculous. He shifted seamlessly from one piece to another, exploring different moods and tempos. There was a gentleness in one section, a lullaby-like quality that seemed to embrace anyone listening, offering comfort and warmth. In another, the music became intense, bold, and dramatic, as though he were telling a story of struggle, triumph, and everything in between. The dynamic contrast held the audience spellbound, each variation revealing a different facet of his hidden mastery. He began to feel the energy of the listeners, even though they were still on the outskirts, silent and respectful. Their presence, their attention, fed his performance, giving it depth and resonance. He could feel the emotion of the crowd, a mixture of awe, admiration, and disbelief, and it pushed him to explore further, to express more, to let the music reveal everything he had kept inside. The hall had transformed from a space of routine and work into a sanctuary of sound, a place where boundaries disappeared, and only the music mattered. The passage of time seemed irrelevant. Minutes blurred into one another, and he lost all sense of the world outside the piano. The broom and dustpan he had left at the side of the stage were forgotten, as if they had no place in this moment. His connection with the instrument was total, and he moved through melodies and harmonies with a fluidity that came from years of quiet, determined practice. Each note was a reflection of his life, his struggles, and his hidden joy. The crowd outside continued to grow, quietly swelling as more people were drawn to the unexpected music. Staff members exchanged glances, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Performers who had arrived early paused, their instruments in hand, captivated by the skill and emotion radiating from someone they had never known to possess such talent. They watched, silently acknowledging that this moment was extraordinary, that they were witnessing the emergence of a hidden artist who had lived in plain sight. He began to play a new sequence, one that was faster and more complex than anything he had attempted before. The fingers that had once struggled now moved with precision and grace, striking chords with clarity and confidence. The music rose, building to a crescendo that filled the hall with intensity and power. It was a bold, commanding performance that left no doubt about the depth of his talent. The audience, now fully aware of the skill before them, held their breath, sensing that they were witnessing something that would be remembered long after the hall had emptied. As the crescendo reached its peak, he allowed a series of soft, delicate notes to emerge, contrasting with the intensity that had preceded them. The effect was mesmerizing, a dance of emotion and skill that held the listeners in a rapt state. Each note seemed to echo through the hall, bouncing off the walls, creating a resonance that lingered in the air. He was no longer playing merely for himself. He was sharing an experience, offering a glimpse into his soul, and the audience could feel it deeply. He paused briefly, taking a breath, allowing the silence to sink in. The hall was filled with an almost tangible anticipation, a shared sense that the next few notes would be something extraordinary. Slowly, he returned to the keys, weaving a delicate, haunting melody that contrasted sharply with the previous power. The dynamic shifts created tension, beauty, and emotion, and the audience remained completely absorbed, their attention unbroken. The room felt alive, vibrant with sound, yet intimate, as though the music had created a private space shared only by those who had gathered. He played with expression, emotion, and courage, every movement of his hands deliberate yet free, guided by instinct and feeling. The music carried layers of experience, memories, and hidden emotion, all unfolding in a performance that felt both spontaneous and inevitable. By the time he reached the end of this section, the hall was utterly captivated. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, as if nobody wanted to break the spell, then grew louder, stronger, more insistent. He looked up briefly, surprised, and saw faces filled with wonder, admiration, and respect. They had been drawn in not by spectacle or showmanship, but by the authenticity and brilliance of the performance itself. He returned to his work quietly, picking up the broom, but his movements were lighter, more thoughtful. The piano sat silently, gleaming in the light, as if it too recognized the extraordinary moment that had just passed. He knew that this performance, though unplanned and unannounced, had revealed something essential about him, not just to the audience but to himself. It was a confirmation of years of dedication, of passion kept hidden, and of talent that had waited patiently for its moment to shine. Even as he continued his cleaning, he felt a quiet exhilaration, a sense that life had shifted in subtle, profound ways. The experience had given him a glimpse of what was possible, of the doors that could open when the right moment arrived. The hall, the piano, and the audience had all participated in a shared transformation, and he carried that with him, a reminder that extraordinary moments could appear unexpectedly, even in the midst of routine and duty. The music grew stronger, more alive, filling every corner of the hall with a richness that seemed almost impossible from someone so quiet and unassuming. He no longer noticed the audience outside or the staff who had gathered. His focus was complete, entirely on the piano, and the notes poured from him as if the instrument itself were speaking through his hands. Each chord, each melody, carried emotion, telling a story that transcended words. The first few people to hear him had been staff, but soon more arrived. Performers who had come early, organizers, and even latecomers paused in their tracks as the music reached them. Some peeked through doors, others leaned against walls, trying to see without interrupting. Nobody had expected this. The man who cleaned the stage, who had seemed so ordinary and unnoticed, was now commanding attention in a way that left everyone speechless. He moved through the music with confidence, blending gentle, melodic passages with sudden bursts of energy and complexity. The contrast made the performance mesmerizing. There were moments of softness that felt like whispers, intimate and touching, followed by powerful sections that shook the air and made hearts race. The dynamics of the performance revealed the depth of his understanding and the passion he had carried in secret for so long. Whispers spread through the hall. People exchanged glances, unable to believe what they were hearing. Some reached for their phones, wanting to capture the moment, but most simply stood, transfixed by the unfolding spectacle. The music seemed to speak directly to each listener, pulling them into a world where only the notes existed. Even those who had passed by with little interest in the performance were now silent, completely absorbed. He felt the energy of the crowd, even though he did not see them clearly. He sensed their attention, their astonishment, and it pushed him to play with more depth, more feeling. Each movement of his hands carried intention. Each phrase told a story of years spent in secret practice, of quiet determination, of a talent that had waited patiently for recognition. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It had become a bridge between his hidden world and the lives of those who now listened in awe. He played with abandon, letting his emotions guide him. Memories of past struggles and small triumphs surfaced, and he wove them into the music. There was a joy in the notes, a sense of freedom and release, and those who listened could feel it. The hall seemed alive, the walls vibrating with the richness of the sound, carrying it to every corner and into every heart. It was a performance that transcended expectation, drawing the audience into a shared experience of wonder and admiration. People began to move closer, drawn irresistibly to the sound. Some quietly slipped into the hall, standing at the edges, not wanting to interrupt but unable to resist witnessing the phenomenon. Organizers and performers who had been busy preparing for the evening's event stopped what they were doing, their attention captured by the unexpected display of brilliance. The man who had always been in the background was now the center of attention, commanding respect and amazement with every note. He began a new passage, one more daring than anything he had played before. His fingers moved with precision and speed, striking chords with power and clarity, while weaving in intricate melodies that required both skill and emotion. The music built, layers upon layers of sound, creating an immersive experience that held everyone's attention. The quiet energy of the hall intensified, as if the very air were vibrating in harmony with the music. Listeners could feel it physically, a resonance that seemed to touch the soul. Some members of the audience exchanged words, though softly. They spoke of astonishment, disbelief, and admiration. Nobody could believe that someone so ordinary-looking, so humble, could command the piano with such skill. The performance was not only technically impressive but emotionally profound. It drew people in, making them feel a part of something extraordinary, something they had never anticipated witnessing. He moved seamlessly from soft, gentle phrases to powerful, energetic sections, maintaining complete control over the flow of the music. The contrast created tension and release, a journey of emotion that left listeners hanging on every note. The hall seemed to expand and contract with the sound, alive with movement, yet intimate and personal. Each listener felt as though the music spoke directly to them, revealing layers of emotion that were difficult to express in words. He noticed, for the first time, the faces of those who had gathered. They were not just watching. They were experiencing, sharing in a moment of something rare and beautiful. Their astonishment was tangible, a silent acknowledgement of the talent that had gone unnoticed for so long. Some held their hands over their mouths in disbelief. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, absorbing every nuance and emotion. It was a performance that reached beyond the ordinary, touching hearts in a way that felt personal and profound. He let his hands linger on the keys after a particularly moving passage, allowing the sound to resonate fully through the hall. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion, as if everyone were holding their breath, reluctant to break the spell. Slowly, applause began, hesitant at first, then growing steadily, filling the space with warmth and appreciation. The man looked up, his face flushed with a mix of surprise, embarrassment, and quiet pride. He had not expected this, had not planned for it, yet the recognition was undeniable. People began to speak, softly at first, then with more excitement, sharing their astonishment and admiration. They spoke of the skill, the emotion, the passion, and the depth of the performance. Some were already planning to share the experience with others, knowing that what they had witnessed was extraordinary and worth remembering. The quiet, ordinary man who had always been in the background had now emerged as a figure of awe, commanding attention and respect through his music. Organizers approached, their expressions a mix of surprise and delight. They praised the performance, expressing amazement at the unexpected brilliance. Some suggested that he perform officially, recognizing that his talent deserved a proper stage and audience. He listened, humbled and overwhelmed, unsure of how to respond. The day had begun with a simple task of cleaning, and now it had transformed into an opportunity that could change his life. The piano sat silently as he took a step back, the final notes lingering in the air. The hall was filled with a mixture of applause, whispers, and admiration. He realized that something profound had occurred, that a hidden part of himself had been revealed to the world in a way he had never imagined. The experience was both exhilarating and humbling, a reminder that talent and passion, even when hidden, have the power to transform moments and lives. As he continued to tidy the stage, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The applause and admiration were not what mattered most. It was the knowledge that he had expressed himself fully, that the music had found its way to others, touching them in ways that words could not. The experience had opened a door, a glimpse of possibility, and he knew that his life had shifted in a subtle but profound way. The stage, once a place of routine duty, had become a space of discovery, connection, and recognition, and he carried that realization with him quietly, with gratitude and anticipation for what was to come. After the applause faded, he stood quietly at the edge of the stage, still holding the broom. The hall was buzzing, filled with staff, performers, and early audience members who couldn't stop talking about what they had just heard. He felt a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. He had played not for recognition, not for fame, but because he loved music. Now suddenly the world had noticed. The organizers approached, smiling and shaking their heads in amazement. They asked him to consider performing officially at upcoming events, praising his skill and the emotion he had brought to the piano. He listened, humbled, unsure how to respond. This was not a path he had ever imagined taking. Cleaning the stage had been routine, mundane, almost invisible work. Yet here he was, offered a chance to step into the spotlight, something he had always avoided, something he had never expected. People began to approach him, sharing their astonishment and appreciation. Staff who had worked alongside him for years shook his hand, some with tears in their eyes. Performers praised him quietly, acknowledging the level of talent that had always been there but had gone unseen. He nodded, grateful but still shy, the attention both overwhelming and thrilling. The quiet life he had led suddenly felt different, as though the doors to new possibilities had opened wide. He returned to the piano, this time with the awareness of an audience. The keys felt familiar, comforting, and welcoming. He pressed a few soft notes, letting the music carry him gently. The hall was empty of the earlier crowd now, but the staff lingered, some still clapping, some simply listening. The moment felt intimate, personal, as if the piano and he were sharing a secret with those who had cared to notice. Memories came flooding back. He remembered being a child, learning in secret, practicing when nobody was watching. He remembered the frustration, the quiet determination, the little victories that nobody had applauded. He realized that all of that preparation, all of those hidden hours, had led to this moment. The music he played now was not just about skill. It was about life, patience, and the ability to wait for the right time to shine. He began to play again, softly at first, exploring melodies that felt like stories from his own life. Each note carried the joy of discovery, the relief of recognition, and the subtle pride of finally being seen. The hall seemed to absorb the sound, reflecting it back to him in warmth and resonance. Even though most of the audience had left, he felt their presence in spirit, as if they had witnessed something that could not be forgotten. As he played, he thought about the people who had been with him quietly, who had always seen him as someone ordinary, someone in the background. They had now witnessed the truth, that talent can be hidden in plain sight, that patience and dedication matter, and that ordinary lives can carry extraordinary gifts. The music seemed to speak to them, thanking them for noticing, for allowing him this moment of expression. He experimented with rhythms and tones, letting his emotions guide his fingers. The piano, polished and grand, responded to his touch, its sound rich and vibrant. He allowed himself to feel free, exploring variations and improvisations that he had only dared to play alone. The music became a conversation between him and the hall, each note a word, each chord a sentence, building a story that was uniquely his. Word of his performance spread quickly. By the next day, people who had attended or heard about it were talking, sharing stories of the man who had astonished everyone while cleaning the stage. Invitations came from other halls, local events, and even private gatherings. He listened politely, still humble, still unsure how to navigate the sudden interest. Fame was not something he had sought, but opportunity was now knocking, and he could choose to answer. He continued to practice quietly, taking each day as it came. The piano became his companion, a source of comfort and creativity. He learned to balance the newfound attention with his own peace, understanding that while recognition was gratifying, it was the act of playing itself that brought him joy. The routine tasks that had once defined his life, cleaning, preparing, helping, were still there, but now they coexisted with something greater. His talent had been discovered, but his humility remained intact. He began performing occasionally, first in small gatherings, then in larger events. Each performance was met with astonishment, and his reputation grew steadily. He received letters, invitations, and praise from people who were moved by his music. Yet he remained grounded, remembering the quiet moments of practice alone in an empty hall, the years of dedication without recognition, and the simple joy of connecting with the piano. Over time, he realized that his life had changed in subtle but profound ways. He was no longer invisible. He had a presence that people respected and admired. But he also realized that what mattered most was not the attention, not the applause, but the ability to share a part of himself through music. Each performance was an extension of his life, a way to communicate what words could not. He looked back on the day he had been asked to clean the stage, realizing how pivotal it had been. A simple task, performed with diligence and care, had led to an unforeseen transformation. The hall, the piano, the quiet presence of staff and audience, all had come together to create a moment that changed his life forever. It was a reminder that even ordinary days, ordinary tasks, can hold extraordinary potential. He continued to play, each note a testament to patience, dedication, and the quiet belief in one's own abilities. The world had seen his talent, yes, but he had also discovered a deeper truth, that joy, expression, and fulfillment come from within, often revealed in the most unexpected ways. And as he pressed each key, feeling the resonance, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be, sharing his gift with those who could hear and appreciate it, quietly, humbly, and beautifully.